So yeah, as was mentioned, my name's TJ. I am a therapist. I work and live in the Salt Lake City area. Clearly, I'm obsessed with Lego, as you can probably see around me. I also am involved in theater, like I mentioned, and all of those are fun, interesting parts about my life. And just one other part happens to be that I am gay and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so because of that, because of my background and that experience, and also because that's the population I work with a lot as a therapist, today I want to talk about what we can do as members of the church to better bear the burdens of our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters or family members or whoever it may be. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, why do I need to listen to this? Maybe this is the point where I get up and go to the bathroom, or fast forward. If you're thinking, I don't have any LGBTQ plus people in my life or in my circle, so like this doesn't really apply to me. It does. I promise you that it does. So please stick around. Even if you don't know it, current statistics estimate that approximately 10% of the population identifies as LGBTQ plus. And if you're thinking, well, we don't have, not 10% of my ward is LGBTQ plus, that has to do with something we'll talk about later with many LGBTQ plus adults leaving the church. But if we think about the youth, who represent a pretty good cross-section of average populations, because most of them are going to church because their parents are making it. If you think about an average ward size, if you've got 50 youth attending that ward and approximately 10% identifies LGBTQ, that means about 5 LGBTQ youth would be attending that ward. And, they may not be open about it. They may not be out, but they are there. And in addition to that, you can believe for sure statistically that there are members of your ward who have close friends and family members who are LGBTQ. And so the way that we minister to LGBTQ plus members is not just a small thing. It's something that affects everyone, because there are LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters all around us. So when people find out that I am gay and a member of the church, one of the first questions, especially from non-members, is why do I still go? A lot, actually, most LGBTQ plus members in their adult life up to this point have decided to leave the church because it can be very hard. And so my answer for them when they ask me that question is because I love it, because it's my spiritual home, because it's where I was raised, getting to know Christ and Heavenly Father and learning about the plan of salvation and all these wonderful things that it's brought to my life, where I've gained a testimony of prophets and of continuing revelation and of the Book of Mormon. And I've felt God's love for me so much in temples and in other places. And it is this place that I want to have this spiritual home. But even with all that, I know why they're asking, because I know it's really hard. And since we're talking about bearing one another's burdens today, I'm just going to be really vulnerable with you guys about what the burden is of being an LGBTQ plus member of the church. It's rough. There's not exact data that's been published or released on this. It's impossible to find, but the best estimates that we can get suggest that at least 90% of LGBTQ plus members end up leaving the church. And when you stop and think about that number, 90%, if we had 90% of any other group leaving the church, if you imagine 90% of redheads leave the church, if that was the statistic, we would be freaking out. And we would be saying like, okay, what are we doing? What are we saying that's driving away all of these redheads? What can we do or say to help them feel more welcome to stay? And it would be a huge deal. We'd be having constant meetings about where all the redheads are going. But sadly, when it is LGBTQ plus people who are leaving in such high numbers, I think maybe because of the social or cultural stigmas, or because we just automatically associate LGBTQ plus people with sin or with the law of chastity, for some reason, it's just kind of been okay. And we've just kind of let it slide. And, maybe we say we're sad about it, but often not very much is done. And I've been so lucky to be in a ward that is just like one of the best wards I've ever been in right now. A ward where not just myself, but there are actually several openly LGBTQ plus members who attend the ward. Some who come from outside of the boundaries, knowing how awesome this ward is, how welcoming and open and inclusive and loving this ward is. And so many of the people in that ward have done so many wonderful things for bearing my burdens that I'll talk about later. But as I was preparing this message, I kind of started thinking how sad it made me that I have to brag so much to other people, especially to other LGBTQ plus people, about how great my ward is and how loving they are, because that they're not doing anything crazy. They're not doing anything outside of the norm. They're just loving and accepting and being open to me and the other LGBTQ plus members. And it's something that really should be the norm. And so it kind of made me sad that I'm like bragging so much about something that should just be normal. The same kind of thought hit me as I was watching a video on the internet recently in which in which a preacher from another Christian faith talked about how he had put up a sign outside their church which said LGBTQ safe zone. And that had caused a big controversy with his congregation, and that the sign had been torn down multiple times until he finally bolted it into the cement. And this is what he had to say about that as this Christian preacher of another Christian faith. If you will open your ears, you will hear the LGBTQ community, some of them crying out saying, I was raised in church. I was thrown out the door and told I was all sorts of derogatory names, but I still want to connect with God. Is there any place I can go where I know at the end of the day, from birth to death, this will be my family, and people will surround me and come behind me and make me feel like part of the family, and not make me feel like, well, you're lucky to be here, but actually celebrate that I'm here. And the first time I watched that, I got really emotional, and I'm getting a little bit still just reading it, for the simple fact that that phrase, is there any place I can go where I know at the end of the day, from birth to death, this will be my spiritual home and my family? I wish that I could say that I knew that, but I don't. In my current situation in my life, I don't know if that's the case, and that breaks my heart. And I know that this is true for a lot of other LGBTQ plus people that I've talked to, whether in therapy sessions or just in real life, my friends. A lot of us don't know if from birth to death, this will be my spiritual home. And whether that's because of what we call bishop roulette, or because of any number of other things, I've got a great ward now, but I don't know if that's going to always be the case. And I don't say this to try to bash the church or any of the members in it. Like I said, I've had so many wonderful people recently that have been helping me feel more welcome and included. But the hard truth of the matter that we need to recognize is that although I truly believe that the vast majority of church members and church leadership would agree with this, would want to make the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints into a safe place where we could know that from birth to death, this will be my family and my spiritual home. There's something going on that's making it that although most people would agree with that statement, it's not happening. There's some disconnects going on. And in fact, Elder Ballard shared a wonderful quote about this. So I know that the brethren and the leadership of the church are thinking about it. He said, we need to listen to and understand what our LGBT brothers and sisters are feeling and experiencing. Certainly, we must do better than we have done in the past so that all members feel they have a spiritual home where their brothers and sisters love them and where they have a place to worship and serve the Lord. The exact same thing that this other Christian pastor was talking about. That's what we're trying to accomplish. So then the question becomes, okay, if both the leadership of the church and like I said, I think the majority of members agree that this is a good goal to have, why is it not happening? Why are at least 90% of LGBTQ plus people leaving the church in their adult years? And as I thought about it, one thought that came to my mind is we seem to have some conflicting messaging or understandings of Christ's teachings on the Great Commandment. And most of us know this story from Matthew 22, where the Pharisees ask Christ, what is the Great Commandment? And he responds, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, I think not just within the walls of our faith, but around the world, and certainly in Christ's day, the desire to follow that first commandment and the sincere drive to show God how much we love him has sometimes led people to missing the mark on what that means. And so I think it's very important to remember the context in which Christ gave this answer, that he knew who was asking. He knew the Pharisees. He knew what they were about. He knew that they were always trying to trick him and trap him in his words. And so if they asked for what is the great commandment, why would he have given two and give them more ammunition to use against him? He had to have a good reason for giving two commandments. I believe it's most likely because the Pharisees, Christ also knew that they focused a lot on showing their love for God. In fact, they had focused so much on the letter of the law to prove their love for God, they had invented 613 extra commandments that they would try to enforce on everyone around them to make sure they were all keeping that and showing their love for God. And they were very critical of Christ whenever he didn't keep these 613 commandments, even when doing so meant lifting someone else or bearing someone else's burdens, whether it was healing on the Sabbath or eating with publicans or sinners. We don't have record of it, but I imagine if they found out about him drinking at a well with a Samaritan woman, they would have had some pretty harsh things to say about that one too. So if Christ is giving them these two answers, he knows the audience he's talking to. I really think that if he had only said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God, the Pharisees would have been like, yeah, great. That's me. That's what I do. That's my whole business. We're set on that. And so he gave this second, which is like unto it, as a litmus test, as if you are truly loving God, you have to also be loving your neighbor, and that one without the other is incomplete. In fact, he even said as much in verse 40 of chapter 22. And when he said, on these hang all the laws and the prophets. So he's telling the Pharisees, on these two, love God and love thy neighbor, hang all of the rest of the commandments and everything else that comes after it, all the teachings of prophets that you cling to so desperately. And so it becomes circular, right? If you love me, keep my commandments. How do we keep his commandments? This is my commandment, that you love one another. And it just becomes this circle. And so Christ, I believe, here was teaching the Pharisees and all of us that is a lesson that we could have used all throughout history, that if your interpretation of how you prove you love God causes you to act cruelly or unlovingly or to ostracize or exclude or judge or any of these other things, your neighbor, then you're missing the mark. You're not loving God in the way that he's asking you to do it. And we can see this, like I said, in big things throughout history, and we can also see it in little people's lives when our attempts to prove how much we love God causes some people to behave pretty cruelly. I think this is actually highlighted perfectly when Christ gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? When the Levite and the priest passed by the man on the side of the road, it wasn't because they were bad people. It was because they were heading to Jerusalem to perform temple rites. And for them to stop and help this person would potentially put them in a position of being ritually impure and unclean, so they would not be able to serve in the temple. I don't think these two guys walking by were like just cruel and didn't care about this person. I bet in their hearts they were saying, and the context of the Pharisees and the Jews listening at the time would have understood this, I have to go to the temple, and it's been my life's calling to make this voyage to the temple and to be able to perform this. And I have spent so much time getting ritually pure and clean to be able to go work in the temple and perform these sacrifices. So I am proving my love to God by not helping this person. I'm proving my love to God because I am on the Lord's errands to go to the temple. And that's why I can't help this person. And Christ told them very plainly that those two were not the one who was being neighborly, but it was the one who stopped and helped. Even though it might have made him ritually unclean or might have prevented him from working in the temple, that's what he knew God would have him do. It's true that loving our neighbor cannot come above loving God, but neither can it come below loving God. That's what was so controversial about Christ to the Pharisees, is that he was doing both at the same time. And that he was saying things like, feed my sheep. And if you have done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. Combine those two in a way that we wouldn't be able to ignore. And I personally think it's one of the saddest things about Christianity in general is that we've kind of forgotten one of my favorite quotes of Christ, which is that by this shall man know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. It's not by this shall man know if ye are disciples, if ye keep all of the 613 commandments, or if you do all these checklist things. But if you have love one to another, that's how people see the light of Christ in us and how they see we're his disciples and we've taken his name on us. So if, in my mind, if that conflict sometimes is causing this disconnect between what we say we want to do and what I truly believe the majority of members of the church want to do, which is include and love and lift their LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters, then how do we actually do it? What does that actually look like? Because I know a lot of people are concerned and conflicted that they want to show love and care and bear one another's burdens, but they're worried about condoning actions that they disagree with or don't believe the same things as, or they're worried that they're not standing up for what they believe is right. And when it comes to that, I just like to rewind it back to our covenants that we've made, especially the one that relates to today's topic of bearing one another's burdens, which is our first covenant, our baptismal covenant. Bear one another's burdens, mourn with those that mourn, comfort those that stand in need of comfort. That's the first one we take, and then all the rest of them are built on that foundation. So if we take that away, the rest starts to crumble too. I also think it's interesting to note that we never once, ever, have covenanted that we would not condone other people's behaviors or that we would call out other people's sins. That's never been on the list of things that we've covenanted to do. What we have covenanted to do is to take Christ's name on us and to be his hands. And Christ's hands are hands that healed and lifted and fed and cleaned. But in addition to that, they're also the hands that when the woman was taken in adultery, and he said, if any of you be without sin, let him first cast a stone. They're the only hands that could have cast a stone and voluntarily chose not to. They're the hands that didn't throw the stone, or like was said in conference recently, that were stone catchers. So if we're going to bear one another's burdens, as has been talked about before already, with so many, easy, simple things that we can do with whether it's chocolate cake or a text message or anything else, what are some of the specific ways that we can bear the burdens of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters? I have a few, none of which violate any commandment or any covenant you've ever made. The first is speak up for them. If you hear a comment or a remark or something that you recognize is hurtful or dismissive or excluding LGBTQ plus people, speak up. And it doesn't have to be in contention. It can be something as simple as, hey, let's not talk about LGBTQ plus people as if they're some other outsider group, because we have likely members of our own ward family who are LGBTQ, or people in our ward who have LGBTQ plus family members. And we want all of them to feel welcome and included. So let's talk about everyone as if they're among us and as if they're part of our family, because they are. It's a simple thing. In fact, Elder Oaks at the recent BYU speech advocated for this when he said, we stand up personally for those who are marginalized. Another specific, easy thing that you can do to bear the burdens of your LGBTQ brothers and sisters is specify how much you love them and give them in no uncertain terms very clearly the fact that you love them no matter what their future relationship status or church activity level or anything else, that you just love them, period, end of story, and you always will. Because that's something a lot of them fear, is that, well, am I only loved right now? But, 5 years down the line, if I'm not coming to church anymore, will they still love me? If I am dating a same-sex partner, will they still love me? So let them know that you will. I also encourage stop using, like we talked about a little bit before, stop using some of the phrases that we think are being comforting, but really aren't. In fact, and they're phrases that we don't even have doctrine for, so we don't even know if they're true, but we just kind of throw them around. For example, a phrase like, well, it'll be different in the next life or change in the next life. We actually don't know if that's true. And as a little side note, LGBTQ plus individuals are 5 times more likely to be experiencing suicidal thoughts. And when you tell an LGBTQ plus person that things will be different in the next life, if they're already struggling, that maybe it's the thing that encourages them to think, well, then let's just take the shortcut to get there. And you don't want to be putting someone in that position. So we don't need to try to have these phrases that try to make us feel better or get us off the hook. We can just be with them in what they're going through and just express our love to them. We can invite LGBTQ plus members to all of our activities, to our homes, to our dinners, to our family nights, and not be worried about the outdated and incorrect and frankly a little bit offensive ideas that LGBTQ plus people are contagious or that they're going to influence other people to be LGBTQ plus, because that's just not how it works. And just invite them around our families, around our kids, or in our activities, in our wards. And the last one I think is a really easy one, is going to the church's website to learn more about the church's official positions and teachings and to get some of the advice that the church gives on the official website. One of the easy ones is I still hear in sessions with clients and talking to people about some bishops and some lessons saying that being LGBTQ plus is a choice. And even on the church's official website, it states that that's not the church's position. So just updating yourself can be a really easy way to help show your love and support for LGBTQ plus people. Now, there was a story that I heard that really touched my heart where a man did many of these things very, very well, in which there was a young gay man who was going to his LDS grandparents' home, and he decided that he was going to bring his boyfriend with him for the very first time. And he was very nervous, not knowing what these very conservative grandparents of his might say. And when he got there, his grandpa was sitting in the living room and asked his grandson, "Oh, who's this friend you brought with you?" And the young man says, "Actually, Grandpa, this is my boyfriend." At which point the grandpa stands up and approaches them, and the young man's so worried about what's about to be said or what's about to happen. But instead, the grandpa says, "Well, then that makes you family. And in this family, we hug." And he just gives the boyfriend a really big hug. And to me, that is such a perfect example of a man doing something that in no way violated any of his covenants or any commandments, but just, in fact, I would argue, kept his covenants more than anything he could have done, because he was acting as Christ would have by embracing this boyfriend and by being there for them and just showing love and support and inclusion. I was fortunate enough to have another story that I'll share with you to wrap up. Happened to me in my own ward. It's a long story, but the short version of it is that about several months ago, a visitor came to our ward who was not a normal member and came on a fast and testimony meeting. And he hopped up to give the very first testimony. And his testimony was one of the most unnecessarily hurtful, homophobic, transphobic, dismissive, exclusionary testimony I've ever heard. And it was really painful to sit there and listen to it. And I had this rush of a million different feelings and thoughts of, what do I do? I'm too angry to get up and say something, but do I need to get up and say something? What about the other LGBTQ plus members in the ward who I looked around and they were all clearly on their faces going through similar thoughts and feelings as myself, and just like, what do I do? And as I was freaking out throughout the next 10, 20 minutes, another member of our ward, this girl, got up, and she's not an LGBTQ plus person, but just a very lovely, wonderful, loving, nice girl, got up and bore one of the sweetest testimonies about God's love. And she said, "I know that God created the day and the night, and that he also created and loves everything in between, the dusk and the dawn and the twilight. And I know that God created the lands and the sea, and he also created and loves everything in between, the marshes and the swamplands. And I know that God created man and woman, and I know that God created and loves everyone in between." And once again, this testimony in no way violated her covenants or any commandments, but it just showed so much love and support to me and the other LGBTQ plus members of the ward, that she was bearing our burdens. She was doing something that I didn't think I could do in that moment, to speak up or say something or to try to express my love for myself and for my Heavenly Father and for the ward. And her doing that simple thing changed the entire meeting, changed the ward in such a profound way. So I know that this is a really big, important topic. And like I said it many times, because I want to be clear about this, I truly believe most members of the church want this sort of a thing and maybe just don't know where to start. But I really liked Elder Holland, a quote that he gave this last conference, in which he said, "As we take up our crosses and follow him, it would be tragic if the weight of our challenges did not make us more empathetic and more attentive to the burdens being carried by others." This is a really critical time in the church as far as LGBTQ plus people and relationships go. There's a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. There's a lot of doctrine that we don't know. There's a lot that needs to be clarified. But what I do know is that LGBTQ plus members of the church, not all of them, but many of them, want to have a spiritual home within the walls of the church that they grew up in, want to have a place where, like this other Christian pastor said, they have a place where they know from birth to death will be their family and their spiritual home. And I know that by doing some of these simple things and by focusing on the fact that loving our neighbor and loving God are not in conflict, but are the same thing, that we can create this kind of a space and this kind of a place for LGBTQ plus members and thus for everyone. And I share this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.